from TYT Investigates, and we were going to talk about the renewable energy having more generating use more electricity in the United States for the first time, more than coal. But today, it's just found out that Bernie Sanders has dropped out of the presidential race, and so that's what we're going to be talking about instead today. Bernie Sanders, as you know, this is the independent senator from Vermont, dropped out of the race today, just moments ago, apparently. Although he won in New Hampshire and in Nevada, and he tied a virtual tie in Iowa, according to The Hill, he lost Super Tuesday bid to become the Democratic nominee for president. He lost 2016, uh, but he did from the 2016 presidential campaign, and especially this campaign in 2020, a household name. And more than that, he really got a following among the young for a lot of his proposals, which pushed the Democratic Party to the left. Things like pushing for Medicare for all, free tuition at public universities. And in the 2016 campaign, he got Hillary Clinton to add the $15 minimum wage proposal. And he also pushed, as you know, I'm sure all of us in the covering climate change know, pushed for the new Green Deal. And he had to share that with Elizabeth Warren. But I'm basically going to read you a little bit more from the, let's see, just can read some more actually from The Hill. This is what they're reporting. And let me just read some more about what they're saying about. Of course, this gives Joe Biden now a clear field in the sense that it'll be just one Democrat, Joe Biden, against Donald Trump for the Republican Party. Bernie Sanders did have to share the progressive lane, as they called it in The Hill, with Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. Um, he emerged as a big fundraiser early on in the campaign, but he was not able to basically appeal to moderates and also to African American voters for whatever reasons. And also, he did appeal very much to the young, but he was not able to get to basically the centrist and to the African American voters, and that helps him a lot. He did also have to compete with Pete Buttigieg, the former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and now the early victories actually concerned the moderate wing of the Democratic Party, because they were concerned, a lot of moderates were concerned that Bernie Sanders would not be able to beat Donald Trump, although polls indicated that he could beat Donald Trump. And so could the polls also indicated that Joe Biden would be able to beat Donald Trump as well. Um, so, and also the concerns about Bernie Sanders' nomination for the Democratic Party got Michael Bloomberg to enter the primary. But when Biden had that 30-point rout in South Carolina that got Buttigieg and Klobuchar to exit the race and endorse Biden, and now Biden's success, as I mentioned in Super Tuesday, he won 10 of 14 states. That certainly gave him a lot of momentum, and then there was, a number of people had said. In fact, Jonathan Larson at TYT Investigates did something just the other day saying that it's good that Bernie Sanders stays in because he raises the important issues that have to still be concerned to separate us from separate Democrats from the Republican Party. Things like Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, and that will still have to be raised. And now the question is, with Bernie Sanders dropping out, will the moderates now feel like, okay, they need to start swinging more towards does the party as a whole need to think that it needs to swing more to the center? And what will that do to the younger voters? Are they going to sit out the election in 2020 as some did in the 2016 election? That's a question that will have to be addressed by the Biden campaign. But Bernie Sanders has publicly said in the past, that if he were to withdraw, he would support the party's nominee, meaning the Democratic Party's nominee in the general election. And so, and he has indicated that, his top priority is to defeat Donald Trump. And certainly, as people watch what Donald Trump has been doing during this pandemic, I'm sure a lot of Democrats and a lot of Americans are concerned about what he's doing during this pandemic and all the mistakes that he made in his initial beliefs, that his anti-intellectual, anti-science approach. So Bernie Sanders has indicated that he would support the party's nominee. Um, the Joe and Bernie Sanders have disagreed on a range of issues, from trade to Social Security to foreign military investments. Sanders pledged to take back the pledged he would back the former vice president during the March primary debate in Washington, D.C. And there's a quote, this is from The Hill again. "Look, if I lose this thing, Joe wins." Sanders said in a one-on-one debate, "Joe, I will be there for you." So you have to assume that Bernie Sanders will also endorse Joe, uh, um, former Vice President Biden. And so this is obviously a big development in what's happening here. And a number of people are commenting on this. Let's see, Milton Biden doesn't give, he says, a C word about the pandemic of progressive policies. Okay. I'm not sure that's quite true, but um, I think he has expressed concern. I think everybody's concerned about the pandemic. I mean, even Donald Trump, you have to believe, has some concern for the pandemic, even if it's only for his reelection and not for all the people who are dying. I don't think it's fair to say that about Joe Biden. Uh, the Democrat CACYR says the DNC changed the rules in the last minute to allow Bloomberg in. Well, so we have to consider whether the people who support Bernie Sanders will now believe that this was a rigged nomination, as many believed in 2016 that it was the party had rigged it for Hillary Clinton. I don't think you can say that this time. I mean, maybe other people disagree. I may be wrong, but my impression, certainly as a voter and a member of the Democratic Party, was that this was a pretty fair, straight campaign, in the sense that they were. It was never very clear that Joe Biden was, going to get all the favors. And then at one point, we thought Bernie Sanders would get the nomination. So it went up and down. It seemed like a pretty fair contest in that sense, that they both were doing it. Let's see. Geraldo says the DNC will not get our vote easily. Okay, that's an interesting point. Since Bernie Sanders was, the leader for the progressive wing, clearly, of the Democratic Party, and forced the Democratic Party to adopt a number of progressive things like the $15 minimum wage, pushed into the Hillary Clinton platform in 2016, and now Medicare for All and Green New Deal and a number of things. Will the Democratic Party put those into the platform? And certainly, I would believe that if when we're smart and you want to make sure that you keep everybody, or as many people as you can in the Democratic Party, to vote for Joe Biden, that you would have to appeal to the progressives as well as to the moderates. It'll be interesting to see exactly what they're doing. And then one person, Sam, says he'll vote third party. You have to wonder, if you vote third party, does that mean you help Donald Trump ultimately win the re-election? Just think about it, Donald Trump for 4 more years. And then somebody else said they thought that, let me switch over here. I'm going to get back to my here, the live stream, and I want to see if I can see some of the, yeah, I'm going to see some of the, I could read it better on my computer than I can. Okay, I'm going back to the live. Let's see what some people are saying. I don't mind 4 more years of Trump. Hey, this is somebody watching TYT Investigates. That's interesting. America deserves him. Well, I don't know that we deserve, anybody deserves Donald Trump, frankly. But this is obviously a very big deal that Bernie Sanders has dropped out, and we have to consider what this will mean. I mean, you have to deal with. I think there's a balance between what is practical, which is what the moderates are feeling. We're saying that who can beat Donald Trump, and also certain ideals that we have as the Democratic parties. It's still going to be the Democratic Party. how far to the middle will the Democrats? I mean, I think a number of people should recall, do recall that President Barack Obama was a centrist. He clearly was a centrist Democrat. He was not, someone who would be considered part of the progressive wing of the party. Um, Somebody said, internet tough guy said a bunch of ha ha ha's. Bernie dropped out. Well, okay, that's your opinion. I don't think it's a ha ha ha. I think Bernie Sanders really did care about the American people. He had some really great ideas that would be very interesting to see if the Democratic Party adopts some of those ideas into the platform for Joe Biden, and whether the country as a whole eventually. It'll be interesting to see if 10 years from now, if the number of the things that Bernie Sanders has proposed actually become the law. And let's see, we also have Aussie girls. I think he's doing it because he's worried about voters endangering themselves to go out and vote, like what happened in Wisconsin. Well, that's certainly something to think about. Well, while the pandemic is going on, I think that may be part of Bernie Sanders thinking. I certainly don't know. I have no connection to the Bernie Sanders campaign, but I think also we have to consider, he has not been winning. So, and if you're concerned about the country as a whole, and you don't want Donald Trump to become reelected as president, then you have to also at some point do what's practical in terms of winning. And uh, so let me look at some more things. Let's see. Cassius Trevis says voter suppression and mainstream media bias. That's the rigging. Okay, that's interesting. I'd like to see what exactly was the suppression that was done. Mainstream bias. Yeah, that may be possible, but the mainstream media seems to get blamed for a lot of things. I mean, mainstream media. I think it's important, while you have to recognize that there are things that are wrong about the relatively free press in the United States, it's also even worse that President Trump calls it fake media, because without a relatively free press, democracies cannot exist. That doesn't mean we don't have a lot to improve upon in the media, myself included, but that also we have to recognize, to say that all the media is bad, to say that everything about the media is wrong, that it's all fake. I think in some sense, and this is probably, I don't know if this is going to get me fired from the Young Turks, but I believe that a relatively free press is really important to a democracy. And even the present mass media, even though there are a lot of issues with them, they're not trusted by the American people. There's a lot of sensationalism in local news. I think also at the same time that it is ultimately where people go when there's nowhere else to go, when you have to fight City Hall or the government, when no one else will support you. A lot of times people think of, the press, think of the media. Can I approach a reporter and ask for help to expose things? I've seen it certainly in local coverage and in national coverage. I mean, if you were to say that you think, I don't know, for example, some of the reporters in the White House who are challenging the president and constantly being attacked, is that fake news? I don't think so. I think it's important that those reporters are there and challenging the president of the United States, whomever that the president might be, left or right. I think it's important the reporters challenge them. But now let's see. Sadie says definitely would sit out rather than vote for Trump. Will be the first time ever not voting. Well, Sadie, we're not saying vote for Trump. Now it's going to be Donald J. Trump versus Joe Biden. So I think that's important to remember. And let's see. Let's get some more of what's being said. Trump is less cognitively impaired than Biden. That's from Mobius. Uh, well, that's interesting. Whether you're cognitively impaired or whether you have a stutter, as Joe Biden said he has, there's a difference, number one. But number two, you could be brilliantly evil too. I mean, if you want to talk about ability to speak, Adolf Hitler was a brilliant speaker, but the content of what he said cost the world 68 million lives when the Nazi Party and the Axis Alliance and the mass murders and genocide. So is that important enough? Yes, it is very important to have cognitive ability, but it's also important to have content in the sense that you're not evil, as Adolf Hitler was. So now what's a custodian colors? Yeah, not rigged at all. Every discrepancy helps establishment candidates, never in Bernie's favor. Nothing to see here. Keep resisting if you support the Dems. You're the problem. Pelosi helps Donald. Okay. I kind of disagree with that. I don't think, certainly, I agree with the part. I'm sure the moderates in the Democratic Party and the establishment did not like Bernie Sanders. We're scared of him. Maybe probably did not agree with his issues. But I don't think you could say that Nancy Pelosi supports Donald Trump. Uh, Interesting concept. If you're thinking of the government as a whole and not recognizing differences between Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump, that's an interesting point. I don't agree with that personally, but I don't know that the Young Turks may. Uh, I was told I can have my own opinions. We'll see whether I'm still here next week, if that's true or not. I hope I am. Weena Jensen. Oh, Weena, you're going. Everyone's going to. Weena said Sanders' visions will not evaporate. They'll grow stronger and stronger. Now that I agree with too. I think that's. I just mentioned that. I think it'll be very interesting to see if 10 years from now, if all the things that Bernie Sanders has proposed, let's keep them in mind. Green New Deal, Medicare for all, free tuition in public schools. If in fact 10 years from now we don't see that become the law of the land, and then this will be very interesting. People will look back and say, Bernie Sanders was the person who pushed America in that direction, and I think that he will be remembered that way. But let's not count him out yet either, because you never know what's going to happen. I mean, although I think he's either I think he's 77, whether he could run at 81. He certainly, no one has ever questioned his cognitive ability. He has a very quick mind. Um, anyway, don't count him out. I'm sure he'll still be, involved as the senator from Vermont, independent senator. I'm sure he'll still be a voice for change, for progressive change. And Geraldo Peralta said they worked harder to stop Bernie than ever worked to slow the Republican corporate agenda. I'd like to see what evidence you have of that. Did they work harder? Did they work to stop Bernie? I think yes. The establishment certainly did not like Bernie. Certainly the corporations didn't like Bernie. And I'm sure they were influencing both Republicans and Democrats in power. But did they work harder on that than the Republicans? Interesting to see. Let's see. David, let's see, where'd David go? This is going so fast. Peter Zelenko said a few other sites are calling out the polls as being off by up to 12%. Wonder if this is real. Well, here's the interesting thing that we should all keep in mind. How real are any sites? For example, it has been said, even by under the Trump administration, the Trump's intelligence community, which Donald Trump does not believe in whenever it's convenient, but they have said that the interference by Russia, China, Iran, but especially Russia, into our elections is continuing and will continue. And you have to really think about that when you look at any websites. You really have to check and see. And I think this is very important, even when you watch mass media. I think I've always told people when they say, well, how do I know what the truth is? I say, go to a variety of sources and then make your own decisions. So it's not just one news source. It's like, don't just go to the New York Times. Don't just go to any particular organization. Go to a variety. And if you see them in a variety of established news organizations and a number of independent sites, then maybe it's true. But if it's not there, if you only see it in one or two places, there's a very good likelihood that that's something that's been hacked into by foreign governments. I mean, this has been said even by the Trump administration's intelligence apparatus, saying yes, the hacking and attack on our elections is still going on by Russia, China, and Iran, and especially Russia. Don't forget, Putin was the head of the KGB for a while and the successor of the KGB. And this is exactly what intelligence people do. This is the whole idea in counterintelligence, is to disrupt the other country. I had two former FBI counterintelligence agents tell me that when I talked about, did Putin try to do this stuff with the oil? And he said, absolutely. Both of them said, absolutely, instantly. He said, this is exactly what you do. It's the basics of counterintelligence. Lemon Line says, put your finger on the chat and we'll stop so you can keep your place. Oh, thanks. I'll try to do that. Thank you very much. And let's see. Sadie says, Biden's campaign can call his problem just stuttering. Anybody watching can see that something else is going on. Gosh, I hope that's not true. The idea of Donald Trump being reelected for 4 more terms is just something that would make me sick, frankly. But that's a personal opinion. That's not speaking as a reporter, but definitely, I think it's very important for reporters to tell the truth as close to the truth as they can. And I think we have to be honest. And you look at what Donald Trump is doing with his presidency. It's clearly, he is. The pandemic has shown that he really is not qualified to be president of the United States. And that's my personal opinion, but also I think as a reporter, it's important to point that out, and it's important to keep that in mind. Do you want Joe Biden to be president? Or do you want Donald Trump to be president for 4 more years? Because if Donald Trump is president for 4 more years, he has a very clear campaign that's against the environment. Speaking as a climate change, reporter, he makes no bones about it. It's all about energy dominance. That's the phrase that he uses. And even during this pandemic, he's had the EPA, the Department of Interior continue the anti-environment policies, pro big oil, pro big business. Cassius says, I agree that a free press is important to a democracy. The problem is that the mainstream media is owned by 6 companies and they're interested more in their profit than news. This is in years I was unemployed because I got fired a lot by people because I wouldn't lie for anybody. I've been a reporter for several decades now, and I've always said that a relatively free press in this country is both a business and a craft, and that's the balance between the two. If you don't stay in business, like all the newspapers that are disappearing, not really their fault, but just because of the internet mainly, and attacks now by President Trump, but mainly the internet. If you don't stay in business, you can't keep your craft and tell the truth. And so there was always the balance between the two, that in a capitalist society, even with some socialism in it, mainly capitalist society, you have to be able to survive and be profitable. But let's get back to Bernie. Uh, let's see. Uh, Alpac says if they, China, Russia, can interfere in our elections, why not use paper ballots? You know that voting machines have been hackable. Yes, voting machines have been hacked. And the question is whether or not, the Republican Party minds that they've been hacked. So if they feel that, just think about it, if Vladimir Putin believes that Donald Trump is better for his country than a Democratic president, certainly Hillary Clinton, whom he hated, would he then try and hack the election so that the Republicans would win? So paper ballots might be a good idea. Who knows? But it'd take a long time. And Mobius says we need a new figurehead. The time they and this time they must be under 50, preferably an attractive leftist woman, so Fox can't ignore her. Well, come on, that sounds honestly a little sexist, but if you're talking about, well, no, I guess it's somebody. Bernie is an old white man, but Bernie had a lot of good ideas. But yes, it should be, if you want to put it that way. Ultimately, who should be able to run for president? Everybody, women, people of color, etc., LGBTQ people. And we had with Pete Buttigieg. And here, Paper Spine says Bernie was the only candidate that could beat Trump. He'll mop the floor with Biden with ridicule alone. Okay, yeah, but he's dropped out now. So now we have to be realistic about what's the next step to do. What do we do now? What do progressives do? What do Democrats do? What do Americans do? Who do we want to be president of the United States? At a certain point, you have to be realistic and say, okay, this is the system now. Maybe you can change the system later, like get rid of the electoral college and have straight, vote by population. But right now, this is the system. What do people do? What do Americans do? Do you then say, okay, I'm going to drop out and not run? Well, then, if if a lot of Bernie supporters say, now that Bernie's dropped out, I'm not going to vote, then there's a good chance Donald J. Trump will be reelected for a second term. Luca Valenti says paper ballots are not the answer. Be blockchain. Okay, so well, what's blockchain? I don't know. Somebody will have to educate me on that. And Weta Jen says, nor Bush or Trump was or is qualified for the job. They have one thing in common, though, a strong team of sinister interests that will elevate and support them through thick and thin. So here's what I'm thinking. here's something that's fascinating. We're going off a little bit about, Bernie dropping out, I think, but a couple of friends of mine whom I love dearly, really nice people, and are Trump supporters. And so I asked them, I said, I'm not judging you. I said, I told them I think of Donald Trump as an American fascist, and I don't say that lightly. But I asked them, why do you support Donald Trump? And they said, clearly, instantly, they said, because he's the most pro American. So then I asked them, I said, well, when Barack Obama was made president, was elected president by Americans, by all of us, when Barack Obama became president, he was given the worst economy, the worst recession in 80 years, and we were at war. It's 40,000 troops overseas uh, in Iraq and Afghanistan. So when he left office, the recession was over, and he had pulled back the troops to 10,000, roughly 10,000 troops overseas. So he took us out of the main portion of the war. And they also brought, the Affordable Care Act. And this couple, their oldest son, had cancer. And I said, before the Affordable Care Act, he would not have been covered because it's a pre-existing condition. They were not able to see that. They were not able to recognize that Barack Obama had pulled us out of a recession, pulled us out of the war, and had saved their son's life. At least, not bankrupted them and bankrupted their whole family, but they were not able to see that. And because Donald Trump is such a brilliant marketer, such a brilliant speaker, and such a brilliant reality TV, celebrity, he's able to convince people that he's done everything and Barack Obama had done nothing. And that's something that we need to consider, that the Democrats need to consider in terms of running against Donald Trump. A Berserk Turtle says, at least we'll have some good laughs with Biden versus Trump. Okay. And Sadie says, it's beyond Trump or Biden. I have no trust in our voting process when many of the voting exit polls are off by more than 10%. Even experts say that anything over 4% is suspect. Okay, that's a good point. What can be done in the meantime? What can be done after the election can be thought about as well. Lemon Lime says, so is Bernie really going to go out campaigning for Biden now? That's a good question. I would think that would be very, very important for Bernie Sanders, for Joe Biden, that Bernie Sanders campaign for him. And I actually also thought, and this is again a personal opinion, that if Joe Biden, it doesn't look like he's going to do that, but if he had picked Kamala Harris to be his vice presidential running mate, that would be something that would say there's some unity, since she attacked him in the beginning of the first debate so successfully, but now it would show some unity. And also as a woman and a person of color, that would bring a lot of people together maybe. But it doesn't look like he's going to go that direction. He may be going with Michigan's governor. But that's fine. I mean, that's his choice. You have to be comfortable, just as Barack Obama was comfortable with Joe Biden. Let's see. ITN Noetic says, I think the action item now is to push Biden hard to the left so he earns our votes. There. Now that's something that's a practical thing to do. And now that we have, in fact, it's going to be Trump versus Biden. How do we, one, help Joe Biden win? Two, how do Democrats help Joe Biden win? And number two, how do progressives make sure that Joe Biden includes enough of their platform? And this will be interesting to see. And maybe part of that is also getting the message out there. For example, I wonder how many Americans actually know what's in the Green New Deal. And how many Americans know, I'll tell you this something interesting. This was what I was going to speak about before Jonathan Larson called me up 5 minutes before I went on and said, Bernie Sanders just dropped out. You really should do that. And thank you, Jonathan. Very good call. I was going to talk about how for the first time in the United States, renewable electricity generated by renewable energy was more than generated by coal for the first quarter of this year. That's the first time that's ever happened in the United States, where electricity generated by solar, wind power, hydropower, geothermal, biomass, all of that was more than coal. And in fact, it's interesting. electricity generated by coal 10 years ago in the United States was 50%. Now it's 17%. And then the electricity generated by solar and wind now is approaching 17 to 18%. And so these are things that most people are not aware of. And then we could say, if the progressives say to the American people as a whole, hey, look, renewable is not about, just renewable is not just about, things that you think of be the left or the right. It's about saving our own planet, our kids, our grandchildren, the air, the water, making sure things are clean. And, the pandemic is proof. That's a wake up call to us. The pandemic this is just the environmentalists point out and the scientists are saying that the pandemic will be nothing compared to the climate crisis that will occur in just 10 to 30 years. They're saying that this will seem like nothing in comparison to that. And that's a wake up call. Not just that's a really important wake up call for all of us. Um, I'm getting off the chart here, getting off about Bernie Sanders. Again, if you're just joining us, Bernie Sanders has dropped out of the Democratic presidential race. He's now he has said publicly that he will support Joe Biden. He said that before, and the question has been raised: will he campaign for Joe Biden? And what should be done in terms of the Democratic Party beating Donald Trump in November of this year, and then what can be done by progressives to push the Democratic Party to adopt some of the policies that Bernie Sanders has been pushing, some really good policies, and which I think personally will be adopted by the country within 10 years probably. And let's see, Peter Zelenkov says, get ready to watch the erosion of our democracy. Well, I hope not. This is, part of democracy. The fact that, that the campaign was run by Bernie Sanders. And I think, if it was stacked against Bernie Sanders, there were things that Bernie Sanders had that Joe Biden did not. You know, Bernie Sanders had a lot of young people support him, had a lot of enthusiasm, had a lot of, energy in his campaign. And at one point, a lot of people thought that Bernie Sanders would be the candidate. And I think that probably scared the establishment, both the establishment and the Democratic Party, but apparently scared moderates and African Americans who did not want to vote for Bernie Sanders or did not vote for Bernie Sanders in the numbers that they did vote for Joe Biden. Lemon Lime says they definitely can't afford the Green New Deal now that they've blown all those trillions of dollars of stock market and corporations. Lemon Lime, I respectfully disagree. I'm covering this issue, and the next stimulus plan will also have hundreds of billions of dollars. And the renewable energies on their own have been increasing. I just looked at a chart the other day, and look, I'll do this chart here. Just imagine the chart's going like this, okay? Here's the chart in the last 10 years. Well, actually, it's the last 20 years. Solar energy goes like this. And then 10 years ago really takes off. So it's 17% of the electricity generated in the United States, the last 10 years especially. And then in that same time period of 20 years, the price of a barrel of WTI, which is West Texas Intermediate, which is the standard for a barrel of oil, the price went up to 100, dropped to 60, it went like this, all up and down. But solar energy, the number of solar energy generated in the United States just continued to go up and will continue to go up regardless. In fact, and on this story, even the oil industry is saying it's time to start investing in renewable energy. Even the oil industry analysts are saying that. They're telling their followers in the oil industry, oil and gas industry, it's time for these companies to start investing more in renewables. And if the companies are willing to do that, certainly the US government should be willing to do that. And it should have been in the last stimulus plan. Certainly the environmentalists wanted it in there, but then Nancy Pelosi did keep it out. And Chuck Schumer, a Senate Minority Leader, both of them said that we needed more to deal with the pandemic immediately to stop that and return the economy, and said in the next stimulus plan, they plan to put it in there, and they should be held to that. Paper Spine says people think Trump is doing a good job because he's on TV a lot. Yes, that's part, and he's no fool in that sense. He knows how to deal with mass media. He knows how to lie to people. I remember watching the State of the Union just a couple of years ago, and Donald Trump's told great stories. They were lies. For example, He brought a family from Long Island whose daughter had been murdered by the M13 gang. And he said, this is proof that immigrants are criminals and we have to stop them from coming across the border. But the fact is, immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, cause less, let me say it again, immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, cause less crime than the general population. So while he told a good, touching story, it was a complete lie. It told, it was a lie that he ain't convinced the American people, though. Excuse me. And on the other hand, they had the Democratic response. This was a couple of years ago, and the grandson of John F. K. spoke. And granted, he spoke to an audience, which was good. It was a very small audience, but then he gave basically a lecture, a political speech, and he's no JFK. JFK was a brilliant speaker who was a great writer, who in fact didn't really want to run in politics. His father forced him to. He wanted to be a journalist, and he was a great writer and a great speaker. And he was able to pull off a political speech and make it sound something that was moving people. And the Democrats don't have anybody like that. So we have to keep in mind, yes, Donald Trump knows how to use the media. He's no easy opponent. And the Democrats have to keep that in mind when they run. And Reptile Z says, hi, peeps, such sad news today. Well, certainly a lot of Bernie supporters are going to feel that. But also, I think we have to recognize and applaud Bernie Sanders for what he's pushed the country toward in terms of the $15 minimum wage, a livable working wage, and also that, Bernie Sanders ran a good campaign. He ran an honest, decent campaign. No dirty tricks, no, he was really upfront and straightforward. That again is personal opinion, but Luca Valente said blockchain will guarantee election security. Okay, that's something, let's tell the Democrats and the whole country. Let's make sure that they use blockchain. If it does, we'll see if that's true. And okay, Reptile Z said, I already said that. Paper Spy said, explain Biden. Okay, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. You certainly can check out his platform and see what he believes in. Alexis Adams says, honey, stupid is as stupid does. Voters are dub. D-U-B. I guess that means dumb. But in any case, well, here's something that a professor of mine in journalism school told me. He said that, regardless of what anybody says on any kind of survey, that when people walk into that voting booth, his experience has been, over the decades he was a CBS correspondent, he said his experience had been that people vote for themselves. And they don't really tell you exactly, they vote what they feel will be best for themselves. And that's probably how it should be. Maybe we should think about the country as a whole and society and the world, but we should do that. But then the reality may be that that's how people vote, and we have to deal with that. Democrats and have to deal with that. Okay, Caranola says the money these establishment billionaires are using to buy their way, buy politicians, buy manufacturing consent, the money used to enact Citizens United and deny Merrick Garland his seat. This is something very, very important, very true. One interesting thing came out the other day that the U.S. Supreme Court backed something that said that dealt with trying to stop money's influence, and that clearly is how, because of Citizens United, which Barack Obama actually publicly condemned during one of his State of the Union addresses, and the U.S. Supreme Court Chief Justice Roberts was upset, said he may not even come to the State of the Union after that. But that's how, a few rich people because here's the reality. I worked in political campaigns before this job. After I resigned as a freelancer at CBS News, I worked on Democratic campaigns both for the U.S. Congress, New York State Assembly, and New York City Council. And one of the things, here's the reality, that because of the way elections happen in this country with the mass media, that if you don't have enough money to buy ads, you can't win. It's almost impossible. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is an exception because she's actually a very brilliant person, an exceptional natural talent too, in terms of speaking ability and hard work. And she also had, worked for Bernie Sanders and had Bernie Sanders people behind her, but she was a very good candidate. But usually, and she also had a wonderful commercial. Um, but what I'm saying is that if a lot of money and you can buy ads, then what it's like is when voters go in and they only see the ads of one candidate, it's like a jury trying to decide the guilt or innocence of somebody after listening to only one side. Because basically, if you don't have the ads and you're not seen, for anybody to win an election. And that's that because of Citizens United, a few wealthy people that can influence what happens because all you have to do is buy a bunch of ads, and then if you have a political action committee, donate hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars and support your candidate, and then your candidate will beat the other one because the people will not have seen anything. And so it's just like a jury going to decide someone's fate and only hearing one side, only hearing the prosecution or only hearing the defense. So that's very, I agree strongly with that needs to be changed. Um, Oops, let's go back down that when it says, Wiener Jensen says, now I get why Biden has been so soft on Trump as of lately. Biden obviously hopes that by being easy on Trump, Trump will in return not knock him down the first potential debate. Well, I don't think, respectfully, I disagree. I think Donald Trump's going to knock down Biden at all costs. And if you look at the way Donald Trump operates, one theme that has been there in my mind anyway, is that it's all about him winning or losing. That it's not about the country, it's not about the world, it's all about him winning or losing, whether he wins an election, whether his companies do well, whether his family does well. And it's not about having the broader societal sense, the broader society as a whole as your object. His main goal is, I will win. And I think he will tear down any opponent that he's faced with. And I don't think you can underestimate his ability to speak off the cuff, his ability to insult. I mean, he picks insults like it's incredible. One or two words, he can really pick the perfect insult for people. Sleepy Joe, and whatever it was, and Crooked Hillary, and all these things. And it's like he's Dirty Donald. He's a dirty player. But again, his whole if you look at what he does, everything he does is focused on one object. That one object is not the world, is not the American people. That one object really is himself. And if you look at it, objectively, I think you can see that. But because of that, he's a very effective politician in the sense that he's very effective at winning. He's able to focus all his energies on winning and losing because that's what I mean, if you look at he says it himself that it's all about winning and losing. And let's see. Mike, now pick some new people. Mike Nelson at Sam Austin. Biden will give us nothing now that Bernie dropped out. That was our only leverage. Well, respectfully, I disagree. I think you're right that Bernie was huge leverage, no doubt about that. And it is a big loss for progressives. But on the other hand, I think that Joe Biden's people are smart enough to realize that what happened, in the 2016 campaign, that when basically the Democratic Party cheated, Bernie Sanders out of his run for the presidency for the nomination with the superdelegate count. I think that they realize that they cannot piss off the people who supported Bernie. And I think they realize if they do, a lot of people will, as a number of our followers here or viewers have said that they're going to vote third party. I think they'll realize that, okay, that was a lesson from 2016 that you cannot completely ignore the progressive wing of the party. Otherwise, so you have a couple of lessons. They're remembering way back to when Michael Dukakis ran against the older Bush. They're saying that when you're too left wing, most of this country is centrist and more moderate, and only when the Democrats are centrist do they win. On the other hand, the other lesson from 2016 is too many of the young people decided they didn't want to vote because Bernie, they felt was cheated out of the election. The progressives didn't want to vote. And so those are two lessons that the Biden campaign will probably have to weigh now between how much do we go towards the centrist part of the party? How far can we go with the quote, left wing or progressive part of the party? Balance that between the two, between those two sections of the, because it is, it is not one monolith. The Democratic Party is a huge range there. Uh, and Caranola says, at Mr. Elder, if you can't pay the rent, you can't pay the rent. Government support against bullying or eviction exists now. Use it. Okay, well, that's being practical again. Certainly, we have to, if you need the money and you got to pay the rent, yes, pay the rent. Although, now there are no, in New York State anyway, they've said that you cannot evict people if they don't pay the rent because of this pandemic. I mean, 30% of the force is now unemployed. And I mean, you think about that, and I don't know how much, Donald Trump can be blamed for the pandemic in the sense that the virus did come from China. It was started in China, and I'm not saying blame Chinese, obviously not, since I've had people, even attack my family and say, go back to your country, even though we were all born and raised here. Uh, the I think it's important the way Donald Trump handled the pandemic that was so bad, was so anti-science, was so still trying to, again, bolster his campaign to be president, focusing on what's good for him and not good for the country, that it was so bad that it exposed how bad a leader he is. As nothing. Think about this. When Donald Trump took over the presidency from Barack Obama, the recession was over, the economy had returned at least to a degree, although two and three, people had to work two and three jobs. I know I was unemployed at the time, but you the recession was over, and certainly, and the war had been pulled down dramatically, and then look what happened. Now we're in a pandemic, and for a while he's saying, "Oh, the economy is great," but then the economy is great um, because he did these temporary short-term things that worked in the short term, and this is how a lot of the corporations work. They work on short-term profit. For example, when it came out that JP Morgan was the number one supporter of fossil fuels, even though they claim to be environmentally friendly, um, the reality is because there's so much emphasis in the corporations on the quarterly short-term profits, the most profitable short-term profits were coming from the fossil fuel industry. And so that's why they all focus on that. And that's part of the problem, is that America needs to focus on the long-term solutions, not just short-term. But we're getting off here about Bernie Sanders. So let's see what Mike Nelson said. Oh, we already got Mike Nelson. Uh, MPLS girl, I guess GRRL 56 says, I'm moving to Vermont. You guys coming? Okay, so I guess she's moving to Vermont. I hope you're close enough that you don't have to use up too much fossil fuels to get there, unless you have an electric car. Alexis Adams says voters make their decisions based on what they see on TV instead of actually doing research about what will help them, because so many people are disconnected from the political, and it cuts off there. He's on my computer. Uh, that's probably true. I mean, a lot of, most Americans get their news from local TV news, and that's not enough. And certainly with the internet, people need to, it's not that hard to do some Google searches. It takes a few minutes. And part of being a good citizen should be to be well informed. And I think that's important to do. The problem too is that, again, let's not underestimate how the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians, but especially the Russians, are doing this, this counterintelligence and putting in fake news, phony stories. I hate that term fake news because Trump uses it, but phony stories and lies into the internet. And you have to be careful in what you see on the internet. I suggest that everybody look at news sources from a variety of sources, including those you don't like. I think it's important to be open-minded and to at least listen to the other side. And the problem is because when we only listen to what we believe in, it just reinforces what we believe in, and we don't learn anything new. We can all be wrong. And I think it's certainly important to understand that and have an open mind about things. Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm already at way past the time I'm supposed to. Well, you know what? I'm going to continue at least to 12:30 or until I don't see people commenting anymore. Which seems to be, oh no, there are plenty of comments here. Let's see. Okay, MFM Michelle 77 says, quote, we're screwed not voting for Biden. Okay, and that's certainly everyone's right. But then I would raise the question, if by not voting for Biden, does that mean that you help Donald Trump become reelected president for 4 more years? And I certainly, speaking from a climate change point of view, that would be awful. He has a very clear, world view, and that is anti-environment and pro-big business, pro-oil, pro-pipelines, I mean, the EPA just relaxed emissions for the auto emissions, even though some of the companies said that they're going to continue it, despite that, like Volvo said, we're still going to go with the California standard. Um, he dropped it from under President Obama. It was going to be 5% reduction, and now he's dropped it to 1.5. And that means some of the estimates mean that some 60,000 more persons are going to get sick because of the air pollution from cars. Um, but that's certainly something that we'll see. It'd be interesting to see what Bernie Sanders himself says, what he says when he addresses his supporters. What he says, what should be done. Um, and let's see what else has been said here. Um, I get somebody. Uh, Red Hood. Do you believe Bernie should have had a harsher tone towards the Joe Biden and exposed? Let me go back down here and exposed him more viscerally, meaning from the gut, in the debates. Would that have made the difference? I don't know. If you're asking my opinion, and I'm certainly not the political part of the Young Turks, but my opinion is I don't think it would have made a difference. I think Bernie ran a good, clean campaign. I think he ran an honest campaign with integrity, which was very refreshing. And it just that the moderates didn't trust him because he was a democratic socialist. That word socialist just scares people, even though the United States clearly has a lot of socialist policies developed by Franklin Delano Roosevelt during the Great Depression. Social Security, unemployment insurance, Medicare, all of these things are socialism. Let's face it, police department, fire department, sanitation department, that's all socialism. That's using the society's money to have something in common, and that's all socialism, forms of socialism. We're a predominantly capitalist society with a good degree of socialism. Not maybe enough for enough people, but pure capitalism does not work. And so far, certainly communism has not worked. So far in our history, and again, this is my personal opinion, the most successful type of economies have been predominantly capitalist and like with a huge portion of socialism. Um, so the uh, Whether or not would Bernie have, if he had taken a harsher tone, would that be more divisive, and would that have hurt the Democratic Party? I mean, one of the problems with Democrats has been that they attack each other so effectively that the Republican candidate then just has to listen to whatever the Democrats are attacking each other about and use that against the ultimate Democratic nominee. So I, that's just your personal opinion. I think maybe it could be true, but my personal opinion is I think Bernie ran a good, clean campaign. I think we're one that I admired, had integrity. He put out his issues, and the problem was that the moderates didn't trust him. And I think one of the key points for his campaign, probably that uh, I think did him in, was when he appeared on 60 Minutes and praised some of the things that happened in Cuba, some of the policies of Cuba, and that just set him, put him up for a target for people pointing out that under Castro's regime, so many things um, were terrible. For example, they pointed out that he pointed out that the education level had been raised to a high degree in Cuba. And then the counter to that was that, yes, but that education level was done with political propaganda. Uh, so, and interestingly enough, they have some of the best medical um, force in the entire Western Hemisphere, and they sent some of their doctors over to Italy, and they have been sending their doctors over to much of South America for many years. But when Bernie Sanders made the political mistake, I think political mistake of praising anything about Cuba during the campaign, even though it was honest what he said, I think the moderates certainly took it the way that they said that this guy is really is. He's pro Castro. That's all they could hear. People hear in broad strokes. They don't hear the details and nuances. All they have to hear is that Bernie Sanders likes something about Cuba, and oh yes, he's a democratic socialist. That means he's a commie, quote unquote, in their minds and a lot of people's minds. And I think because of that, the moderates didn't support him, and then also the African American community, for whatever reasons, didn't support him. I'm not sure exactly why, but Red Hood said, "Do you believe Bernie should have had a harsher tone?" I already said that, right? And uh, so let's see, it's Laitala phrase, and this person is asking whether or not I believe that from an ecological point of view, Biden is the lesser of two evils. Yes, absolutely. Compared to Donald J. Trump, Donald J. Trump's worldview is very consistent. Energy dominance, pro big business, pro big oil, pro fossil fuel, pro whatever is the short term, quick return, and nothing about renewables, nothing about everything he considers. If I were to use Trumpian terms, he would say that this is, weakness. Well, he'd use another term, but I won't use that. He just basically says that this is wimpy. He would call anything about renewables wimpy and not macho, not strong. And he would use that type of language. And clearly, his worldview is consistent: energy dominance, pro fossil fuel, anti renewable, anti sustainable, anti environment. And it's very clear. Whatever you may think about Joe Biden not being a Bernie Sanders, clearly he's not a Donald Trump either. Donald Trump is totally the other side to that. So, and now let me see. Okay. Um, Paper spine. Trump is destroying the planet for profit. Trump is hoarding medical supplies for resale at a markup. I don't know what proof you have of that, but one thing I have noticed, and this is a question, it appears that he is, again, playing politics and only giving the medical supplies, such as ventilators and masks, to states that supported him. I don't know if that's exactly true. I think that's maybe after the criticism from the mass media, including the traditional media sources, he may have changed some of that. The I think that's something that has to be considered, that examined whether Donald Trump is sending those medical supplies to states that supported him in 2016 and states that support him now in the 2020 election. And again, that points to what I was saying before, that Donald Trump is very consistent, that everything is focused on helping himself and his family and his business, and not what's best for the country necessarily, and certainly not what's best for the earth. Um, let's see. We're going to go. There's some calls says, "What's an Auschwitz?" And I am not going to read that person. I'm sorry. That's I I went to Dachau, and I've seen that. I've seen what happened over in those camps, and the most efficient camps I've ever seen in my life, and but efficient at destroying a genocide. And I will not put this person on. And the that changed my life when after I went to Dachau and I saw how efficient they were. Every T crossed, every I dotted, the most efficient setup for exterminating people. And from there, I came up with what I consider my life's philosophy. It's not enough to do well in life; one must do good as well. So, and let's see. Shad Arrow says Bernie is saving lives after the Wisconsin primary yesterday, with people risking their lives to vote. If Bernie drops out, no more primaries, no more people risking their lives to vote. That's an interesting point. If that's true, then it's certainly another thing to commend Bernie on, that he's taking people's lives in consideration. A You'd have to think of Donald Trump, if he were in Bernie's position, would he drop out to make sure that more people didn't get the coronavirus? I don't think so. Bernie would, though. That's the difference between a Bernie Sanders and a Donald Trump. And so let's see. Mr. Elder says, I don't think you can move Biden to the left. Biden is a right winger. Well, how do you define right winger? I define right winger as Donald J. Trump. I don't think you can classify Joe Biden as a right winger in that sense. But Mr. Elder seems to think he is a right winger from his point of view. That's a consideration that the Democratic Party must have, that a lot of progressives who supported Bernie Sanders may view from their vantage point Joe Biden to be a right winger. I don't know if that's the majority of progressives. I would hope that the majority of people would recognize that, at least in terms of right wing has to be Donald Trump and not Joe Biden. Sam Austin says, yes, absolutely. That's why he uses the B word, and moaning won't help. It'll only strengthen mainstream Dems. Okay. Paper Spine says we all have to vote against Trump. He's a fascist. And so I've now been on for an hour, and okay, there's still more chats going on, so I think I'll continue a little bit longer. So let's see, Weena Jensen says the problem with the two-party system that everything tends to be divided into black or white. Interesting point. A number of the European countries, for example, have parliaments where they have, I don't know, a dozen parties. And let's see, Caranola says, at Shad Ara, that is a brilliant assessment. Yes, that has got to be why Bernie dropped out. It would be so like him to put our lives before voting in primaries during this awful crisis. Oh, referring back to Bernie Sanders dropping out because he doesn't want people during this pandemic to be exposed to the coronavirus by lining up to vote, as they did in Wisconsin. And let's see. And Karen Ola says, I'm so, with a lot of O's at the end, proud of Bernie. I'm torn as to how to vote in November. Mr. Eller says, nope, I will just not vote, not voting for the lesser of two evils. Sam Austin says, I just don't understand why Australia's system is the same or even similar to ours. And Weena Jensen says, sorry, I just see Scandinavian people everywhere. I'm from Denmark, and I tend to try to identify people's national identity based on their names. Jesse Wu says, cry. Peter Zelenko says, Biden will lose, and we can't even prove that our votes matter since they never double check results. Paper Spine says, that's interesting. And let's see, IT Noetics, I'm skimming an article on Vox, but the private sector has struggled to stay viable on top of a universal low-cost public alternative. CS Mariah says there will still be primaries. Good question. I think they're calling for a number of them to now be, I would think, now that there's only one candidate for Democratic Party, they would stop it so that people won't go vote and expose themselves to the coronavirus during this pandemic. Okay. Oh, wait. Saxman Matt. Talk louder or have you all already to, oh, I'm not talking loud enough. Sorry. Okay, well, IT Noetic says, at Samuel Austin, seems Australia's private healthcare system is slowly dying as the public system is taking over. Any case, I think I've spoken enough about Bernie Sanders. This is T.Y. Chang from TYTI Investigates. This is an important day. Go read about it and think about how you're going to vote. I think it's important that we all vote. Sorry, I respectfully disagree with anyone who says they won't vote. I would also push people to consider when you vote, do you want Donald J. Trump to be president for 4 more years? Certainly for the environment, that would be a disaster. And that's not just opinion, that's just fact, in my opinion, fact. So I'm T.Y. Chang from TYT Investigates. Listen, stay safe, be healthy, and I will see you Friday. And on Friday, I'll probably talk about how my original story for today was about how for the first quarter in this country's history, more electrical energy came from renewable sources than coal. And that's something we can all look forward to in the future, renewable energy. And Jonathan Larson will be back tomorrow at 11:30 Eastern time, and I'll be back again on Friday. Again, stay safe, be healthy, and bye-bye.